What's up, guys? So last week, no one was able to guess the card art, which was Godless Shrine from Gatecrash. If you'd like to have your comment featured, just try and guess the card art this week. Also, next week, I will be on a stream on the channel Coder Foundry. We're trying to do the world's first race for the Destiny 2 Deepstone Crypt. I know we're a magic focused channel and it will always stay that way. So next Saturday there will also be another deck tech video in addition to that, so don't worry about any other content interrupting these. Although leave us in the comments, we were considering doing just random streams of other games. We'll probably be streaming Magic gameplay at some point, but we wanted to know what y'all would think of us just streaming other games that we're playing anyway. It would not impact video production in any way whatsoever. We'll always have the Saturday deck tech every time we're available too, so just wanted to see what y'all would think if you would watch random gameplay if it didn't affect Magic videos at all.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Jank Divers, where we dive into the janky side of Commander. I'm Isaac.
And I'm Brent, and today the deck we're going to be looking at is called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. So we're using a new card from Commander Legends called Archelos Lagoon Mystic is the actual name, but here we have an edit of it.
A custom card alter.
Yes. So for one, a black, a green, and a blue, you get a 2/4 Turtle Shaman, and as long as he is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped, and as long as he's tapped, other permanents enter the battlefield tapped. So what are we doing with this? Well, we're crewing vehicles. So we tap our commander to crew the vehicle, and then this means that we can also not only attack with the vehicle, but it makes all of our opponent's permanents enter tapped. We also have some food tokens for emergency rations. And in this deck, we get to run the Jank Diver itself, Junk Diver. So just for 3 mana, a 1/1 flying, and when it dies, you return another artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a hybrid sacrificing artifacts and vehicle deck. So we have a lot going on, so let's get into it.
So first up, we wanted to talk about our food package. So Feasting Troll King for 6 mana is a 7/6 with Vigilance and Trample. When he enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, you get to create 3 food tokens. And then you can sacrifice 3 food tokens to return him from the graveyard to the battlefield. You can only activate this on your turn, but that's okay. It's just an extremely resilient creature that is 7/6 with Trample and Vigilance. So it's going to be really useful for attacking down and getting in some damage. Gluttonous Troll for 4 mana is a 3/3 with Trample, and when he enters the battlefield, create a number of food tokens equal to the number of opponents you have. So this is generally going to get you at least 3 tokens in a 4-player game. Sometimes with my pod, we have more than 3 opponents. Depending on the pod, you could have more tokens, but usually you're going to get about 3, which is still really good. And you can also pay 2 mana and sacrifice another non-land permanent to give Gluttonous Troll +2/+2 until end of turn. So this could be a food token, or this could be any other non-land permanent, obviously, but it can get fairly big for a turn, and you can swing in and get some damage in that way, or you can just use the food for other purposes. For example, Savvy Hunter for 3 mana is a 3/3, and whenever it attacks or blocks, you create a food token. You can also sacrifice 2 foods to draw a card. So this helps with some card draw and also lets us sacrifice and have a use for our other foods, while also being a good card to generate some food tokens. We also have Gilded Goose for 1 mana is a 0/2 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, create a food token. And you can pay 2 mana and tap it to create a food token. So you can just keep on doing that to create a food token every turn if you want to. Or you can tap it and sacrifice a food to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Just as a little 1-drop mana dork that can also create us some foods. Witch's Oven, you can tap it and sacrifice a creature and create a food token. If the sacrificed creature's toughness was 4 or greater, you create 2 food tokens instead. So something great you can do with this is you can just sit back, and if somebody tries to kill one of your creatures, or if one of your creatures is going to die anyway, you can just sacrifice it and get some free food off of it because it's going to die anyway. And then course, we have a lot of food synergies that you've already seen. Having food instead of just nothing when a creature would die is just very beneficial to us. Oko, Thief of Crowns, you all know him, you all love him. 3 mana, 4 loyalty counters. +2, create a food token. +1, target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. And -5, exchange control of target artifact or creature you control and target creature and opponent controls with power 3 or less. Just a great food engine for us. Lets us turn our foods into elks, which can then crew our vehicles. So it kind of fits in perfectly with our deck.
So next up, we have some ways to sacrifice our artifacts for additional value. First up is going to be another new card from Commander Legends, Keskit the Flesh Sculptor. So for 2 and a black, he's a 1/3 human artificer. He has partner, but don't worry about that for this deck. And you can tap him, sacrifice 3 other artifacts and or creatures. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So this lets you sacrifice extra foods or other artifacts or creatures we might have lying around to get additional value. It does throw 1 into your graveyard, but that's not the end of the world. It's really efficient for being able to draw 2 cards. Then Sai Master Thopterist for 2 and a blue, a 1/4. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, which is always nice. And then you can pay 1 and a blue to sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. So this lets us get a Thopter every time we play a vehicle or just a random artifact like the Witch's Oven or a Mana Rock. You create a lot of tokens this way. And having the ability to sacrifice 2 artifacts at any time to draw a card, it's a good card draw engine for us. Next up is Trail of Crumbs for 1 and a green, an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you make a food token. And whenever you sacrifice a food, you may pay 1. If you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent from among them and put it into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library. This is a good way to dig through our deck, especially when we're going to be sacrificing foods naturally anyway to cards like Sai and Keskit. You can also sacrifice the food with its own ability if you're really desperate, but it's better to use one of the outlets.
We also wanted to talk about some of our vehicles. Weatherlight for 4 mana is a 4/5 vehicle with flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you get a look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand, and you put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. It has crew 3. Since most of our ramp is in the form of mana rocks and we have a lot of vehicles, a good portion of our deck is actually historic. This lets us basically just draw a card every time, but it's a little better than that every time it deals combat damage to a player. Sky Sovereign Council Flagship for 5 mana is a 6/5 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker and opponent controls. So this lets us have some spot removal on a massive flying vehicle. It has crew 3, so easy enough to crew up as well. We also have Heart of Kirin for 2 mana is a 4/4 with flying and vigilance. It has crew 3, and you may remove a loyalty counter from a planeswalker you control rather than pay Heart of Kirin's crew cost. This is an extremely efficient card. 2 mana for a 4/4 with flying and vigilance. So you can use this to attack and then crew it up again on somebody else's turn to block with it. Very good. And also lets us use our Oko or some of our other planeswalkers that we'll get into later as a way to crew up our vehicles.
A couple other vehicles we wanted to talk about would be Conquerors Gambit. It's a 4 mana, a 2/10, and when it attacks, you exile it at the end of combat, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control, and it has crew 4. It flips into a land called Conqueror's Foothold, which taps for a colorless. You can pay 2 to draw a card, then discard a card. You can pay 4 to just draw a card, and you can pay 6 to return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So not only does this synergize with itself, such as being able to draw, then discard, and then later when you're are out of cards in hand, you can just pay 6 to get the card you discarded back if you need it. It can just get cards out of your graveyard repeatedly if you had to sacrifice them to cascade or they got milled into your graveyard by other means. It's just a powerhouse with all the options it has. Next up is the Silent Submersible for 2 blue and 2/3. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, you draw a card, and it has crew 2. So just a good draw engine that is a vehicle, which is something we're going to want in our deck anyway. This is also a flavor win, as this is the dive of the dining, drive-in, and dives part of the deck. So next up we have some inspired cards. Inspired is cool because we're running so many vehicles. They can also enter tapped with the commander sometimes, but that's not as relevant. First up is going to be King Maekar, the Gold Cursed for 2 and double black for a 2/3, a human. And whenever King Maekar becomes untapped, which is what inspired means, you may exile target creature. If you do, put a colorless artifact named Gold onto the battlefield. It has sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So this card is extremely good, as not only does it work really well with the vehicles with the whole untapped portion of it, it creates artifact tokens, which is something we're very interested in this deck anyway, so it helps us on 2 fronts. Next up is Painseer for 1 and a black, a 2/2, and when it becomes untapped, reveal the top card of your library, put it into your hand, and you lose life equal to that card's converted mana cost. This is a good draw engine, just drawing a card every time we use this to crew a vehicle. And then finally, Daring Thief for 2 and a blue, a 2/3, and whenever it becomes untapped, you may exchange control of target non-land permanent you control and target permanent and opponent controls that shares a card type with it. This is really cool, as we can create a gold token, a food token, and just switch it out for whatever big scary artifact our opponent has. Or we can just steal mana rocks, which is also really powerful, especially in the early game. You can also switch around creatures, like if you have an extra Thopter lying around, just take their big creature and give them a Thopter instead.
We also have Disciple of Deceit for 2 mana as a 1/3, and Inspire. Whenever it becomes untapped, you may discard a non-land card. If you do, search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost as that card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is pretty good, as a lot of our good cards have other cards that cost the same amount, naturally. So it lets you trade in cards that you don't need. As you can see, we have a lot of card draw. So if you're already really far ahead, maybe it's time to cash in one of those card draw cards and just tutor up an actual win condition or something to help you close out the game. I really suggest looking at the deck list for this one, as you want to make sure you know what all the targets are for Disciple of Deceit, since it is a really straightforward tutor card. Ghostly Pilferer for 2 mana is a 2/1, and when it becomes untapped, you may pay 2 mana if you do draw a card. So this is sort of inspired. It just came out in a different set, so it doesn't have that keyword on it. It still works the same though. And whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, you get to draw a card. So this works if somebody casts a card with flashback, or if somebody casts their commander from their command zone. Anything like that, you're going to get to draw extra cards. And you can also discard a card, and Ghostly Pilferer can't be blocked this turn. If you just want to start chipping in for some unblockable damage, or you don't have a vehicle for whatever reason to crew it up, and you want it to be tapped safely, you can just make it unblockable. Then you get to attack with it, and they can't block it, so it's probably not going to die. And you get to untap it and draw those cards. With all these inspired cards that care about becoming untapped, Quest for Renewal just seemed like a really powerful card just to run. For 2 mana, whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, you may put a quest counter on Quest for Renewal, and as long as there are 4 more quest counters on Quest for Renewal, untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. Now this is especially nice because as long as you have a vehicle, you can crew over what you need to. So if a vehicle has crew 3 you can tap 12 power worth of creatures to crew that vehicle technically. So as long as you have 4 creatures, you can just use one vehicle to tap all 4 of those creatures and get all 4 quest counters right then and there. And then you're triggering your Inspired every turn, and you have pseudo vigilance with all of your creatures. It lets you block with them and stuff. It's just a really neat card. We wanted to mention it.
So next up, we have some ways to weaponize the food tokens. First up is going to be the Antiquities War for 3 and blue. It is a saga, and as it enters the battlefield, after your draw step, you add a lore counter. And after the 3rd lore counter, you sacrifice it. So for the first 2 lore counters, when you add them, you will look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So just some pretty decent card selection. But then the big one, the 3rd one, artifacts you control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. This will effectively crew all of the vehicles, and most of them are under 5 power, so it will also buff them. And any artifact tokens we have lying around will become 5/5s that are ready to attack. Next up is Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas for 2 and a blue and a black, a planeswalker with 3 loyalty. And +1, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library. And -1, target artifact becomes a 5/5 artifact creature. So this one is nice because it effectively crews a vehicle forever. You can also make a food token into a 5/5 indefinitely. And then -4, target player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is twice number of the artifacts you control. So late game, you'll probably have a lot of foods and mana rocks and artifacts sitting out. The -4 gives you the in-game potential of just nuking one player out of the game. Same goes for Antiquities War, but that one could add enough damage where you might be able to get multiple people.
We also have some more general artifact payoffs. Shimmer Dragon for 6 mana is a 5/6 with flying. As long as you control 4 or more artifacts, Shimmer Dragon has hexproof. And you can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to draw a card. So if we have a lot of mana rocks or a lot of foods, or just vehicles we don't want to attack with this turn, you can just kind of tap them and draw cards with them. It'll let you dig for whatever you need to keep going. Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge for 6 mana, 5 loyalty counters. Creatures and planeswalker spells you cast have affinity for artifacts. So this just reduces the colorless mana for each artifact you control. Most of our cards will just cost their generic casting colors. His +2 is he deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and you gain X life. His -3 is return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Pretty good if you've lost a vehicle due to a removal spell, or if they were able to block it and kill it. You can bring that back, or just any of your other artifacts that may have died to removal. -8, exile the top 10 cards of your library. Put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. Pretty good. Like I said, our list has a lot of artifacts in them. And Time Sieve, for 2 mana, you can tap it and sacrifice 5 artifacts to take an extra turn after this one. With some of our food generating cards and some of our other token cards, this will just let us create a lot of extra turns, which is really good since our main plan of this deck is to attack people down with vehicles. Extra turns just give us extra combat steps and card draw and untaps. I don't really need to tell you how good extra turns are, but it was a pretty natural fit in our deck, so we included it.
So next up, we have some lands that have some interesting synergy with our commander. So if you remember, as long as Archelos is untapped, other permanents enter the battlefield untapped. So the Eldraine lands that only enter untapped if you control 3 or more of their respective basic land type. Usually in a 3-color deck it'd be hard to run all 3 of these, but because of our commander we can. So Witch's Cottage, which is a swamp, enters tapped unless you control 3 or more other swamps, or if our commander's untapped. When it enters the battlefield untapped, You may put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. Typically, effects like this aren't the best, but on a land it's incredibly good, actually, as it doesn't really cost us anything. Gingerbread Cabin is a forest, the same type line. When it enters untapped, you create a food token. Obviously, we're a food deck, so this card is going to perform well for us. And finally, Mystic Sanctuary, which is an island. When it enters untapped, you may put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library, which is really good. We also generally don't go all out with our mana bases. However, these cards have basic land types and as such are fetchable. So if you happen to own fetch lands that say getting basic land types, such as Misty Rainforest for island and forest, those would perform really well in here if you wanted to build it yourself. That's going to be it for diners, drive-ins, and dives. If you liked the video, we'd appreciate if you dropped a like on it, maybe left a comment in the comment section for what you thought about it, or if you think you can guess the card art in the background, and we'll see you next week with another deck from Commander Legends.